Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Shaul Mishal, who is a visiting professor at the Council on Middle East Studies at the MacMillan Center. He is a professor at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya and the head of the Middle East program there. He is also the Brian Mulroney Professor of Government at Tel Aviv University. Professor Mishal has published several books on topics relating to the Palestinian national movement, the Palestinian Islam, the political economy of Israel and the Palestinian Authority, as well as Israeli-Arab political culture and Shiite leadership. Today we'll talk with him about the communal dimensions of the post-Arab Spring in the Middle East. Welcome, Professor Mishal.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Let's begin with an overview of your research. Tell us about it.
Look, the big question was what happened in the last 6 years since the uprising and the armed rebellion in the Arab world crossing the Middle East, because this was something that never occurred before. I mean, we had rights, but not to such extent. And what happened is it took so long that I started to ask myself some question, among them, is this another violent act or something more harder than it used to be and more significant to what's happening to the regimes? And I came to the conclusion that analytically speaking, I think what happened mainly is the diminishing of the power of the states and the rising of the power of the communities. They always were there, but they were subordinated most of the time to the authoritarian regimes. And all of a sudden, everything exploded out, and things are going on up to this minute, and nobody can guess what's going to be the future.
Right. So what did you look at? Tell us about your methodology.
Look, I try to follow it by some knowledge on the social science. So I built a kind of a perception, a multi-dimensional perception that tried to ask 4 questions. What are the visions of both sides, the regime and the people who are the opposition? What is their agenda, the changing environment, and the resources that each of them are able to use? And I came to the conclusion that there is a significant difference between the pre-Arab Spring era, when vision was clear, environment was defined very well, everybody knows its place, and all of a sudden things are start to change in a way that you have to interpret it, the vision of each side, to see to what extent they still believe in their ultimate truth or values. What happened to the environment that changed maybe their attitude and position? And how do they set up their priorities in terms of to what extent they are able to continue getting legitimacy, identification, participation of the people? And the most important thing is how it affect the policy that each side use in order to further its interest. I think before the Arab Spring, government definitely used coercive means, but not to such extent. They were relying more on symbolic norms and maybe some kind of rewards and benefits. They try very hard to continue this way, but it didn't work, at least in some of the countries. As we know, there are places like Syria or Libya or Yemen, that it is really full-fledged civil war.
Right.
In Egypt, it's much less violent, and I think we can say it's mild kind of Arab Spring, because Egypt is exceptional, which is, we can say, the only nation in the Middle East in the Arab world. And it was, historically speaking, they joined the Arab world officially only in the mid-50s. In Egypt, we have a big argument, who are we? Are we Egyptian? Are we European, etc.? But then they are the real nation.
Okay. Let me ask you this. When you use the term Arab Spring, it brings to mind for me Egypt in particular. Did the Arab Spring start in Egypt?
No, Egypt was the second
Okay.
place. The first place was December 2010, Tunisia.
Okay.
And then it spread
To Egypt?
to Egypt, and from Egypt to Syria,
Okay.
and so forth and so on.
Because for me as a Westerner, Egypt, because in my mind, was a relatively stable nation. And it seemed like overnight it became violent. Can you speak to that? Because you had said it basically happened overnight. And is that true? Or in looking at prior to the Arab Spring, were there telltale signs leading up to what occurred?
There were signs that it's going to occur, but nobody expected that it will happen at this time and against Mubarak. Because at the end you have enough pushing elements that those things will happen. And they are waiting for the pulling. So the pushing factor were there all the time.
So what are those factors?
First, you have this huge gap between the low class, the middle class, and the high class. It's unbelievable. I mean, they're very poor. Most of the population is young, up to age 19, and most of them are poor. They hardly can find a job. And if they go to universities, they're almost impossible to find something that's suitable to what you studied, and etc. So most of the people are in very bad shape, while the government surrounded by very rich people. And this happened in Egypt, I mean, and it's become worse than it used to be. And on the other hand, I think that don't forget the networks and this public communication that never occurred before. I mean, all of a sudden, Orthodox Muslim women, built a kind of a network. And through
And
it,
what kind of a network? I mean, did social media
It's
play a
Facebook.
role in this at all? Okay.
including, you might smile, but I found that they invented Facebook marriage.
Really?
I mean, marriage through the Facebook. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on. Therefore, the control of the government and their confidence that they know exactly what's going on, because they have many or several intelligence services that follow almost everything that goes in this country or other countries. But I think Facebook did the job, and many people discover a new world. I mean, it's the serious, real phenomenon that Arab regimes or any other regimes don't know how to handle it. Look at this country. I mean, all this opposition against the government, against the White House. Most of it, I mean, it's energy and its powerful influence, I think, come from the network, from the Facebook, etc. And that's what happened in the Arab world. And all of a sudden, they realized that the world is different, then things can happen. By the way, the same year, in 2011, there were other places beyond the Middle East that they have similar protest. It was in Chicago, it was in Wall Street, it was in Spain, which means I doubt if we can just minimize this phenomenon only to the Middle East. I think it's spreading in several other countries, and I don't know what's going to be in the future. I know that something changed drastically in the relationship between what we used to say public people and the government. Things, I don't know what's going to be the future, of course, of the state or the political structure in the Middle East. And I think that's spreading beyond the Middle East. We can see what's going on in Europe. People are confused. People are looking for some new symbols, new identity, kind of different beliefs.
Do you think it has anything to do with the really rooted in the economic troubles, both in the Middle East and in other places in the world, where people simply are not being able to find jobs and make their way in the world with a job? So
I think economy is a symptom, because in the end there is, I think, a new and higher expectations from people of what's going on, since they live in different world. This is a shifting interest and identities, and people every day define themselves in different place. So I think the global economy, on the one that did very well, but for certain kind of people. But I call it not a global, I call it's kind of a local economy, which means it's a mix between local and global. And I think we have a problem with this balance, because the local benefits and the global interest. And so far, I think the world is searching for some formula that nobody knows how it's going to be, what it's going to be, and how it's going to affect the whole world, all the globe, not only in the Middle East. But the Middle East today, I think it's kind of a laboratory, the things happening there, and in a way, this can spread to other places beyond the Middle East.
So let's get back to your paper in terms of, you know, the specific countries that you look at and the current situation. Who are the actors shaping the political scene there today?
Look, the way I look at it, I always see high-rise building. The Middle East, try to imagine it as high-rise building. On the top, you have the huge, big, rich penthouse. This is the global power. Of course, it's US, Russia, EU. And the second level is the local penthouse, I mean the regional penthouse. You have Saudi Arabia, you have Israel, you have Turkey, you have Iran, maybe Egypt. And then come all this apartment building under this, and under the penthouse and the top of the tower. And this is the real tragedy in the Middle East. Some of them are destroyed, some of them are burned, some of them are facing thieves, floods, everything. But the new phenomena is that the Middle East all of a sudden facing a basement. In the bottom of this high rising, somebody built a basement. And this basement have all the non-state organization. I mean, they don't follow the rules, the political rules of the region or the states. On the other hand, they become very influential in the way that if you look what happened in the last 3 years, if you open the newspaper and you look at watch TV news, you see ISIS became the leading power in the news. I mean, ISIS is the party that shaped the worldview of many countries, world power, and the regional power. You have US, you have Russia, you have Iran, you have the European countries who fighting this non-state group. So something happened in a way that didn't happen before, is the real communication in the Middle East is not between the penthouse on the top and the state under, but with the bottom line, with the basement. I mean, it's unbelievable that those small groups can shape the public opinion, the interests, the priorities, the values of such big powers.
Yes, because of the terror that they cause around the world, and then how that is reported. Is that your point?
They are small, but those small has such a big influence on our daily life. It's in New York, it's in Paris.
All around the world.
It's all over the world, and they, for sure, trying to focus on capitals and big cities because they're where the media is. So here you see the effects of the kind of how to say, absurd communication between those terrorist organizations. By the way, not all of them are the same. ISIS is just terrorist organization, but you have Hezbollah and you have Hamas, that they are also, in a way, deal with some social issue. They look at the community, too, the needs of the communities, of the people under their influence. But generally speaking, I think the real phenomenon in the world that maybe we don't pay attention to it academically or analytically is the emergence of those non-state organizations, which I call communities. So if you look at many places in the Middle East, communities are leading the agenda these days.
And when you say communities, can you be more specific?
Yeah.
Who are in those communities?
Look, in Lebanon, you have 16 Christian sections, for example. In Syria, you have the Alawis. They are the minority and they're in the country. You have the majority Sunni, you have the Druze, you have the Kurds, and tribes. So you have, it's cutting across religious line, ethnicity, tribalism, extended families, etc. And in this case, the main difference from my point of view is that the relationship within those communities based mainly on trust, while within the states it's based on contract, let's say. Look at this country. I mean, what kind of allegiance people have to the government? It's a matter of contract. I mean, we can't talk about your relationship as citizen with the government based on trust. It's more based on contract. What should be done, what shouldn't be done. I think in the Middle East, especially at this period when communities are above everything, trust is the most important element that influence all the political climate.
Okay, moving forward, how do you see these communities influencing the, how a country is governed?
It's hard to say. Today, it depends what we're talking about, because it's not all of them are going through the same phenomenon. The same phenomena of having such a big disorganized order, etc. If you look at Egypt, I think Egypt will stay as a state, because Egypt, in comparison to other Arab countries, doesn't suffer from this cleavages, ethnic cleavages, tribalism, etc. You have a very solid sense of Egypt nationality, Egypt nationalism. People are related, obviously, to their government and to their regime and to the system. This is not the case in the other Arab countries. There, I think communities are, especially in countries, what we defined as Fertile Crescent. This is the countries surrounding Israel. It's Lebanon, it's Syria, it's Jordan, it's Iraq. They built on, their structure is built on ethnic group and tribal structure. And I think how this is going to affect the political order, the political system, it's very hard to say, Because on one hand, you have this temptation to say, listen, if communities are so strong, so let's build something that will, give something to those communities in terms of sovereignty, of control, etc. But on the other hand, how these are going to be able to run this very upheaval situation. So, and above all, they don't have any experience to run countries based on federation or communities. So we are in a limbo, and I think we are in a stage of significant confusion because nobody knows how this is going to look 10 years from now, for example. But for sure, it's not going to happen in the near future.
So what do you conclude in your paper?
What I conclude that we're going through very hard time in the Middle East. Unfortunately, the local wars will continue. The protests will continue. The uprising of people. It will have here and there maybe. It will follow by some efforts to bring to relatively some maybe peaceful situation and open dialogue between the parties, but I don't see there is anything significantly going to be changed in the next few years unless if the big powers, so to speak, will be able to force their ideas, their solution, their plans on the different parties. And it's very hard to say, to see it happening in the near future.
Well, it is difficult times for sure in the Middle East, I think, and in many of the countries there. So, I guess we'll have to see how things unfold over the next few years.
Yes, I think we have to adjust our expectation to these uncertainties. And I think this uncertainties is all over the world.
Right.
I mean, the Middle East is maybe went to the extreme pole. I think it's happening in many places, but don't occur yet.
So you had mentioned, perhaps having the EU or the United States, for instance, intervene in some of these situations. I mean, do you think diplomacy really could have a role in helping move things along more peacefully?
For sure, but you need it's a necessary condition, not sufficient. I mean, because at the end, you have so many elements there, from the top to the bottom, including those non-state organization in the basement, that everything you do, you have to think in broad terms, because you always have somebody who is not going to like what you're suggesting, and he can, cause a lot of damages.
Yeah,
so this is
complicated.
not. I mean, look what's happening now. They try to bring Hamas, who is Islamic Palestinian organization, non-state, but it seems that he's have enough power in order to bring big Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, like Iran, to negotiate with Hamas in order to influence him in one way or another. So I said that diplomacy is very crucial, very important, but it cannot work in the traditional way. You have to talk simultaneously with different people, different languages, and always to shift according to the circumstances.
Okay. Well, it will be interesting moving forward to see what the outcome is in many of these countries.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for being here with us today.
No dull moment in the Middle East.
No, that's for sure. Thank you for being here with us
It's
today.
hard. Once to say, I teach here at Yale, and I found it's quite hard to try to explain to the student the full picture, because they're used to very known political order, institution, how it works, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in the Middle East, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For more information about Professor Mishal and his research, please visit our website at macmillanreport.yale.edu. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.